Hello there, lovely people. It's Alex from Nintendo Life here, and today it's time for us to review Grand Theft Auto The Trilogy, the definitive edition, on the Nintendo Switch. This review was originally written by the stupendous PJ O'Reilly for NintendoLife.com and has been adapted for video by me. But anyway, that's more than enough waffling. Let's dive right into things. It should have been oh so easy, or so one would have thought. 3 epic open-world masterclasses that took the gaming industry by storm back in the early noughties, finally arriving on Switch and giving us an absolute smorgasbord of hilarious criminal hijinks to dig into. Grand Theft Auto The Trilogy, the definitive edition on Nintendo's portable consoles, should be a marriage made in heaven. However, as it turns out, Rockstar must have been almost fully divorced from reality to let this port release in the state in which we've reviewed it. The games here themselves need no introduction. Grand Theft Auto 3, Vice City and San Andreas released in 2001, 2002 and 2004 respectively, delivering spectacular open worlds that are absolutely oozing with edgy atmosphere, amazing soundtracks, memorable characters, and of course, hilarious slapstick action. They're meticulously crafted slices of satirical Americana in which to run amok. That stuff is all still here, but it's been massively compromised by a port that frankly beggars belief, especially considering that the most recent of these games released 17 years ago. This is a trilogy that should run beautifully on Switch. There can be no excuses. What we've got instead is an outright weird graphical makeover, blurry Vaseline-smeared visuals, janky controls, a constantly struggling frame rate, myriad bugs and glitches, missing music, low-quality audio, bizarrely long loading times, freezes, and more besides. This is a trio of Grand Theft Auto games running and, in some regards, looking worse than we've ever seen them, and we just don't get it. We kicked off our time with this definitive trilogy by diving into Grand Theft Auto 3, and even in the very opening moments, as soon as the game gets underway, the problems are obvious. Like, from a personal point of view, me, Alex, watching the opening cutscene, I assumed it must be some hideously compressed video. I couldn't believe that was the actual visuals of the game. We had to pause and turn the brightness level up to max, and then reduce the contrast to 0 just to make the picture look acceptable first of all, before jumping into a vehicle and taking off across good old Liberty City. Except this wasn't Liberty City how we remembered it, and certainly nowhere near the Liberty City we'd expect from a revamp. This port of a game from 2001 suffers from constant and serious pop-in, with buildings and bushes and passers-by magically appearing all around you as you maneuver through the city streets. Worse than this, however, are the other vehicles which tend to materialize right in front of you, giving you virtually no time to avoid them, a problem that directly affects the traversal of open world here, and one that drains almost all the fun out of driving, something which, unsurprisingly, you tend to do quite a lot of in a game called Grand Theft Auto. This issue persists throughout all 3 games as well. It's exacerbated to no end by a frame rate that stutters along whenever you pick up any kind of decent speed, or fancy pulling off some tricks, and drastically affects the base level of enjoyment you can have in these sandboxes. No longer were we cruising along, switching to our favorite radio station and enjoying the truncated soundtrack on offer, instead cursing at our screen and wondering how on earth anyone could let this treasured trilogy launch in such a state. It's a really odd feeling. We've spent so much time with these games that we just expect to enjoy them, but unless you've got some seriously low expectations, that's pretty much impossible to do here. In combat, and again this is across all 3 games, the stuttering frame rate persists, making for some woefully inept scraps. Gunfights are a mess for the most part, vehicular showdowns suck, and they're all further hindered by controls that just don't feel great. There's gyro support and HD rumble included, which is something, we suppose, but it doesn't help as shooting just feels basic, clumsy, and sticky. Animations are janky, and the blurred Vaseline visuals make deciphering where your shots are landing an absolute bloody chore. The new visuals are certainly an acquired taste, one that we have not ourselves acquired, but they can look fine at times. Vice City especially has had a nice upgrade in this respect, but it only goes so far as the city streets, ambient lighting, and buildings themselves. Characters are another story entirely, and as as we're sure you've already seen online, there's a lot of very odd-looking folk roaming the streets of these games nowadays. In terms of the main protagonists, Tommy has definitely come out of the makeover the best, but poor old CJ really does look extremely odd at points, kind of like a rubber figure with bendy arms and a huge bulge protruding from his back when he's crouched down. In handheld mode, some of the visual problems, such as the extraordinarily low resolution, glitches, textures, and so on, can be seen in a more forgiving light, and you'll maybe even occasionally, and almost entirely through the power of nostalgia, find yourself feeling that old familiar GTA magic. However, in docked mode, and that's everything that you've seen, all of the shortcomings are laid bare here. There's nowhere to hide. The resolution is well below 720p, and it's been smeared with some sort of after effect that makes things even worse. The default picture settings are awful, and the stuttering and jankiness is just plain to see. It all just looks really, really bad on a TV, and we've never once thought that about a Grand Theft Auto before. We really, really thought, or maybe we just hoped, that this would be an easy peasy, slap a 10 on it, and let's all go to the pub sort of review. There aren't many sure things in this business, but it was hard to see how they could mess this up, especially given Rockstar's deep pockets and the vast resources presumably available. Yet Grand Theft Auto The Trilogy, the definitive edition, and I'm never going to get over that name, is, as it has turned up on the Switch, a complete mess. The further into these games you get, the more the action ramps up, the more painful all of these shortcomings begin to get. It's no wonder Rockstar failed to show this one before release. It's also no wonder you can't record clips of it whilst playing, because under no circumstances is it anywhere good enough. And also, that's generally disabled when a game is too powerful for the Switch, or at least it's pushing it to its limit. There are 3 amazing games here, 3 stone-cold classics that we love and have played through more times than we can remember. However, we strongly advise picking this up on any other platform if possible, or at the least, waiting until it receives, hopefully, an absolute metric ton of patches to bring it to the level of acceptable. Oh, it's such a disappointment. Grand Theft Auto The Trilogy, the definitive edition on Switch, delivers 3 of gaming's true greats in a shockingly rough package that manages to suck pretty much all the fun out of Rockstar's stellar crime epics. This is a poor series of ports, a shoddy, stuttery, low-resolution mess full of bugs, glitches, audio problems, and more besides. If you can grab this on any other platform, we'd advise you do so, or at the very least hold off until it's been patched and hopefully improved in the future. As things stand, this is a very, very long way from definitive. This is not the way we want to remember these games. You've reached the end of the review, and that means it's time for Alex's personal thoughts, and oh my god, if you've seen the video with me and John talking, you already know, sort of my initial thoughts, and I've played it more since then, and this sounds like an exaggeration, but every time I play this, my opinion of it gets lower and lower. I'm noticing more issues left, right, and center, and after seeing so many things wrong with these 3 games, it just makes me so sad, because, yeah, I know, the original games, I'm sure there are some people who will be, sort of running to the comments saying, well, the original games only ran at a roughly sort of 20 frames a second, and it's like, yeah, I know, and, that was acceptable back then for an open world game that was defining the genre. But it's 20 bloody years old, at least the first game is. Well, the first game in this trilogy, Grand Theft Auto 3. It's 20 years old. It's running on a system God knows how many times more powerful, and yeah, I know, it's only the Switch. But that's not an excuse. You only have to look at things like The Witcher 3. That's a port, and it runs fantastically. Yeah, it's a low resolution, but it was made for a system originally, systems that were 2 generations younger than the PS2. And it runs on Switch, and it runs better than this port of a 20-year-old game that looked... Well, it didn't look great on the PS2 when it first came out because it was this open world, revelation. There is so much wrong with this series of ports, and it's absolutely baffling, absolutely baffling that it would be released in this state. It's not finished. It's barely even been developed. I mean, you see all of these issues where they've clearly just run things through an upscaler, be it a polygonal one or otherwise, and it's just got it wrong. Like, the machine's got it wrong because it doesn't understand the artistic direction or, you know, sort of any of the other bits and pieces. But they still decided, you know what, let's just release it. Let's just, you know, charge the price that we're paying for it, despite there being so many problems, so many oversights. It just smacks of a lack of care and consideration, or maybe time, but I'm getting very skeptical right now. If I had to sum it up in a short little soundbite, this trilogy of games, this remaster, this definitive edition of 3 of the most influential open world games of all time is a disaster.